Welcome back to the Capital Confidential podcast from the Times Union and the Hearst Corporation. I'm Dan Clark, author of the Capital Confidential newsletter. With this year's elections now behind us, it's time to start thinking about next year, both in government and on the campaign trail. Changes in federal funding are expected to make next year's state budget way more difficult than usual, and there are a lot of ideas on what to do about that. This week, we're talking to someone who knows an awful lot about that. It's State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. Thanks for being here.
Dan, great to be with you.
So the state budget, as you know, we had some out-year gaps that we were looking at that were pretty significant. And now we're getting this new information that's kind of like our revenues are coming in that are very, very healthy.
Yeah.
So how do you take that? Does it feel like it'll be a little bit easier to negotiate state spending versus revenue? Or is this more of a like, thank goodness we have it, we should, keep it safe?
Well, we've been saying from the Controller's Office for many months now that although revenues have been coming in on a monthly basis, we track that monthly, as you know,
right,
higher than projected, that for next year, because of those out-year budget gaps that were baked in to the budget that was approved, back in May, those gaps, and then if you add on top of it the impact of the federal cuts, would really make next year's budget process more challenging than the one that we had earlier this year. So I think, to answer your question, it is certainly welcome news that revenues are coming in stronger than projected. Some of that has to do with Wall Street. As you know, we just had our Wall Street report. They're on track. Barring anything strange between now and the end of the year, a record year of profits, some $60 billion in profits, which will also translate into more money in the bonus pool. Bonuses will be paid out after the first of the year, which will still be in the current budget year. So I think what that all adds up to is that it's an improvement in the picture. There still is going to be a gap for next year and growing gaps after next year because there is still some uncertainty in the economy.
Right.
And the impact of the federal cuts, especially on healthcare, will start to be felt. So I don't think we're out of the woods in terms of having to make tough decisions on spending. And as you know, you cover the budget process. There will be many expectations on the part of many different constituent groups for more spending in a host of areas. So I still think it's going to be a more challenging year next year than we've had, but there's going to be a little more breathing room. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I think so. And I remember it was either 2021 or 2022 where we had a budget surplus because of all the federal funding that was coming in. And I remember asking Liz Krueger, the chair of the Senate Finance Committee at the time, does it make it harder to have more money or less money? And I don't remember exactly what she answered, but she said, it's easier to have more money. But in my head, if I was a lawmaker, it would be so much easier sometimes to just say, we don't have the money for that thing than have to say, like, we have the money, but we're deciding not to do that for you.
Well, remember, I was a legislator for 20 years, representing part of Nassau County. And there were some tough years, and there were some very generous years. And I think you're right. It's the expectation game, right?
Mm-hmm.
The groups that come up, whether it's on healthcare or education or senior issue, we go down a long list. And there are so many needs that are out there, obviously. The advocates are always well prepared, understand what the financial picture is, and will often make the case as to why, if they don't get the funding that they're asking for, which is often an increase, how that will make the local economy even worse, in some ways,
right,
and how the services they provide, especially in the nonprofit sector, how that really helps government. So, I guess it's a better problem to have when you have more money rather than less money. Nobody likes to cut. And the problem in New York when we have had more lean years, because there is an aversion to doing cuts, we've often resorted to more borrowing, more debt.
Right.
And that's a challenge because, New York is still one of the most highly indebted states in the nation. We pay our bills, so our credit rating is always very strong. But one of my concerns had been that, next year's an election year, right, as you well know. If we had to make some tough choices on spending, would we revert back to that bad habit of putting more off on debt? So hopefully with this increased, I won't say increased, let's say improved revenue picture at this point. But, the problem, Dan, is we don't know how this will hold up.
Yeah.
Will in fact Will there be an impact? Everybody's still speculating. What will the tariff policy really mean in the long run, right? If it's driving up costs, that means even the costs for government services will go up. So our spending may have to go up. The Medicaid program is a very important program, very expensive program. And in New York, we really have had a challenge in terms of controlling those costs without hurting services to people, right? And since the federal government in this restructured relationship, which is really penalizing states, especially a state like New York, we're not going to have as much money for Medicaid. How are we going to manage that? So yeah, the picture is better than we thought it would be. That could change, and we're still not out of the woods. We're still going to have budget gaps that we have to deal with.
When you look at those high-cost programs like Medicaid, and there's also programs within Medicaid that are high-cost, like the CDPAP program, things like that.
Very controversial, yeah.
Yeah. If you were speaking to the legislature and speaking to the governor, and they're looking at, maybe we want to cut costs, where would you advise them to start? Like, what's the lowest hanging fruit? And I guess not just Medicaid, but if they did have to make cuts.
Well, look, I would say overall, and let's stick with Medicaid for a moment because it is such a high impact part of the budget. And this may sound a little self-serving coming from the state controller, but we do audits of the Medicaid program all the time.
Oh yeah.
And as you know, we're always finding opportunities to save money without hurting people getting services because there's inefficiency built into the program. People being double coded, just inefficiency in terms of making sure that the payments are appropriate. People who aren't entitled to coverage, let's say some folks who are actually out of state, somehow still qualifying. And then the other area, which I don't want to make it sound like this is, I don't want to overblow this as a problem, but there is still an issue of fraud and ripping off the system. Right. As you know, we just had this case in Schenectady County with D.A. Carney where a Medicaid transportation company had ripped off the system to the tune of $2 million. It could have even been worse, but that's what we were able to document. Yeah. And so we were able to bring charges against the owner of the company and one of his employees who were part of this fraud. There's more of that than there should be. And so we play a role, as does the Attorney General's office and local law enforcement, but putting more dollars into Medicaid audits and looking at fraud, to me, that would be certainly a place to look at. And I think overall with state agency spending, the attitude tends to be, this is how much money we had last year. How much are we going to add to it?
Right.
And I think sometimes it would be better if we would say, what can we do to be smarter about how we're spending the money? Already DOB has put out the call, basically a flat budget for everybody. But what everybody should try to do, including here with this office, is how could we perhaps be a bit more efficient? And sometimes, in government, there's not as much priority placed on that. And I think given the challenging times that we're going through and this continued impact of the federal restructured relationship, I think we're going to be compelled to be smarter about how we're spending money. And again, that doesn't mean cutting programs or hurting people, just being a bit more wise in how we are spending money and making sure there's a return in terms of quality of services, overall impact on the state's financial health.
Yeah, exactly. A good example is the CDPAP transition that's supposed to save the state money for Medicaid dollars. I'm wondering what else the state could. I'm not inside the Medicaid system or the state agencies, but I think you're exactly right. And especially from the perspective of a lot of New Yorkers who are having to, assess their own budgets, I think that they would love to see the state do something like that.
Yeah. But you look at how that rollout has become so controversial.
Yeah.
A lot of people feeling in the effort to save money that they're denying people services, people that really are entitled to it. I think the jury is still out. The legislature's had a lot of hearings on the whole process. That was an example, as you know, where our oversight role was cut out. It was deliberate that, we would not review the contract. Now, I always complain when they eliminate our oversight. But on this one, maybe they cut us a break because everybody's complaining and coming to us and say, "Wait, we had no role in it." Perhaps if we had a role, it might have been a better outcome. But we'll see. Folks have asked us to audit that program. I think because it's in such a transition right now, we really have to wait a bit before we would go in and audit it. But that is an example of the administration. You got to give them credit for. They said this is an area of cost that's growing exponentially, and we need to do something different. But whenever you do something different that impacts that many people, a lot of folks aren't going to be happy.
No, exactly. And I think a lot of it had to do with the specific company chosen and
the way it was chosen. And,
exactly, the way it was rolled out. And just for listeners who aren't familiar, the comptroller was cut out by statute to review the audit, just in case you don't know about that. That's interesting too. I mean, we had the contract transparency bill last year. I don't think the legislature passed it this year, did they?
No, in terms of reporting on contracts where we've been cut out, no. It had been vetoed, twice now,
right?
And we still think it's important just to have the information out there. I mean, look, I take the point of view that this office is set up to be an independent level of oversight, and I actually think for the administration, it's another level of, in effect, protection for them. Because let's say a contract is let that there are issues with it, as you're seeing, with CD Pappas we're talking about. Instead of being mad at the administration, it could have said, "Hey, the controller approved it. It was already looked at." Well, when you take away that oversight, you take away some of the credibility, of the process. So what we said, if there are emergency contracts or other special situations where we're cut out, at the very least, there needs to be a public reporting of what the contract was, what was it for, how much. We're in an era where there's a lot of cynicism out there about government, and you're not going to make all of that go away, but you have to be as transparent as possible, is my view.
No, exactly. And I think a very good thing that has happened I don't know, I don't consider your two agencies to be connected, but I think the Inspector General has done a really good job at shining some transparency on some of these systems. But I think that your office also does it in audits, because you release audits of state agencies, state programs, and inside that audit, you give the agency opportunity to respond. I actually don't know if that's required by law. It may be.
It's by our standards. And I think it's an important point because, and again, it's part of our view of transparency. We'll do an audit. We share the audit before it's published, before it's finalized. Whether it's a state agency or a local government or a school district, they have a chance to answer anything that they think we're saying that they don't agree with. Mm-hmm. We might change then the final version. And if there's still a disagreement at the end, they can give us a written reply. They could say, you don't know what you're talking about, and we will print it and include that in the audit. So it's out there for the public view. But I think I agree with you. I think the IG role is a very important one. We do work parallel, but I think between the Inspector General's office, the Controller's office, there are checks and balances out there that I think sometimes the public is not as fully aware of. So I'm glad you raised that.
And I think we'll raise that again right after this break.
Great.
We are always busy here in the Times-Union newsroom, whether it's covering breaking news, writing in-depth features, or giving the latest local sports highlights. There is a lot that goes into what you read in print and online at timesunion.com and on all of our social channels. So join me, Jessica Marshall, every week on The Eagle, a Times-Union podcast. We'll pull back the curtain and go in depth on the news that we're covering and the award-winning journalists who bring it to you at the oldest and largest newspaper in New York's capital region. Listen to The Eagle at timesunion.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back on the Capitol Confidential podcast with State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. So you are up for re-election next year in 2026. How are you feeling about it?
Well, I love being Comptroller of the State of New York. It's been a great opportunity for me as someone who's always been committed to public service. I think we have a great team here at the office doing the people's business, and I'm looking forward to going before the voters once again, and hopefully my contract will be extended. That's what it's all about. But I look forward to the opportunity to remind people about the work that we're doing, and I think we have a good story to tell, and I'm confident about not only my prospects, but I think the prospects for the Democratic ticket. I know it's a challenging political environment out there, a lot swirling around, but I think Governor Hochul has provided steady leadership, and proud to serve with her. And I think Letitia James, our Attorney General, talk about a strong person and someone who fights for people. I think that's a good team. To be determined who the Lieutenant Governor will be. But I think all four offices are up. Of course, as you know, Governor, Lieutenant Governor run together. But I think it's going to be a strong Democratic ticket, geographically diverse and diverse in many ways. Proud to be a Long Islander. Long Islanders usually don't end up in statewide office, but we're an important part of the state as well. So want to hold up that part of that regional representation, and looking forward to. I like doing the government part, but I know in an election year you got to do the politics as well. I'm focused now more on government, but we'll shift to the politics at the right time.
If I was in your job, I would feel the exact same way. I wouldn't say that I would hate the politics part, but I would be so much more interested in the government side of it because I'm just a policy nerd in my heart of hearts. Cost of living, I think, is going to be the big issue again.
Yeah.
We heard it last year, obviously. We've heard it for a long time.
Yeah.
Does your office have any role in that, do you think, to address the state's high cost of living? Do you have any tools in your toolbox?
Well, so in terms of cost of government, we do. That's
Sure.
what we talked about the audits earlier, trying to make sure that the money is spent more efficiently and effectively. I would say another very important part of the equation of continuing to live in New York for many people is retirement security.
Oh, yeah.
And we have 1.2 million New Yorkers who are attached to the state retirement system, and certainly our responsibility to invest the money wisely and ensure that those pension checks will be there for people so they can continue to live in New York. I think that is an important part of what's been providing economic security for many older New Yorkers who have been in public service, working for the state or working for local governments. The high cost of higher education has been a big issue for many families.
Oh, yeah.
And some folks don't realize, Dan, that we administer the state's 529 college savings program. And that's been a very effective program to really help people navigate the high cost of higher education. And more recently, we've launched the New York ABLE program that is similar to the 529 program, but it's a savings program geared for people with disabilities so that they can achieve more financial independence without losing their federal benefits. That's a newer program. We're trying to have more people be enrolled in it. So actually, there are some very direct ways that we can have an impact in terms of the programs that we administer. We also have spent a lot of time, especially coming out of COVID, of really focusing on the challenges that are out there. We've had a series of reports looking at the issues we've broadly framed New Yorkers in need. So looking at poverty rates,
Food insecurity,
housing costs. Now, again, those reports focus on the issue, suggest some paths forward. But keep in mind, again, the Comptroller's Office, we're not a policy shop. We don't make law. So I don't have the ability to, impose a policy
Sure.
that would, change the cost. But I think also looking at, particularly for folks downstate, the cost of public transit, the MTA, we've been very focused on keeping the attention about appropriately funding public transit. It's for upstate communities as well, but obviously the MTA has been a big issue, downstate particularly. So yeah, there have been a number of very specific areas where I think our work, either in terms of the programs we've done that have helped deal with the affordability question and the kinds of analysis we put out on our reports, help to focus policymakers, be it the executive, the legislature, advocates out there, let them know that we are painting the picture of what the needs are across the state.
Do you think that the legislature in particular sees your audits and your reports on these issues and treats them as actionable? I feel like sometimes they don't explore the recommendations or the areas that your office addresses. Do you wish that they would more?
It varies. Again, our audits don't have they're not enforceable in the sense that, people say, well, you made these recommendations. How come you can't have them be implemented? Well, they're recommendations, right? We don't have the force of law. But I would say, on the other hand, I was in New York City recently, and someone came up to me that's in the advocacy community and said they used our report on food insecurity to make the case at the city council for increased support for food programs. And the data that we provided gave them the hard facts that they could use in their advocacy. And in fact, the council did an increase in support for those programs. So I do think that, and sometimes legislators will come to me and say, based on an audit report that we did, or an investigation, sometimes even, right? They will introduce a law that will then deal with, like on IDAs, Industrial Development Agencies, often there are some issues there. And I know some of what we had in our reports and some of the investigations that we did, that resulted in some changes in law as far as oversight of IDAs. So, yeah, no, does it happen every time we do an audit or do a report? Obviously not. But it probably happens, more often. And I'm always, when I'm out there, legislators are always saying, wow, I read your report. It's helping to frame my point of view on a certain issue. So, yeah, I think we have, I do think we have an impact.
I find myself going back to your reports all the time because a lot of the time, your office is the only, I don't want to say the only state entity that provides this kind of data, but it's the only office that provides this kind of data in a really publicly accessible way. Whereas, I don't know, the Department of Health could have data on food insecurity, but maybe it's difficult to interpret, whereas your office can put that into words that regular people understand. And that's why I use it so often in my reporting.
And I appreciate you saying that because, when I arrived here, I said, wow, we collect a lot of information. We have a lot of reports, data all over the place. It doesn't do any good if we just have it sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah.
So what could we do with this data to format it in a way that's understandable for everyday New Yorkers? And so I've always put a priority with our budget and policy group and the research that's done from some of the audits. Say, let's not have us sit on this information. How do you get it out there? But what you said is so important in a way that's understandable and clear, and that's sometimes a challenge, right? But I've always said we have to be relevant to the issues that are going on, and again, I'm very mindful that this office needs to be the least partisan of all the offices,
right?
And almost everybody that works here is civil service. I mean, I don't know whether they're Republicans or Democrats, and they come up through a merit system. So when we are doing an audit, we're calling it on the merits. And even on our research reports and a budget and policy group, I always say we're not here to cheerlead for a partisan position. We're here to help inform the broader debate. Obviously, I have a point of view, right? But I'm very mindful that we can't overstep the role. Because if we do that, right, if we're just viewed as we're parroting something for a party line, you have no credibility.
Right. I mean, that it's the same thing with journalism.
Yes,
if I look like that I am biased,
right,
then nobody is going to listen to or read my stories and think it's non-biased.
Right.
You have some primary challengers for the first time in a while. How are you feeling about that?
I've run for office a number of times, and I'm always up for the look. It's when you have the opportunity to serve, you have a defined term, and when your term is up, you can either run again, run for something else, and other people are entitled to run as well.
Sure.
So it's just part of the territory. I mean, I'm not. I'm not. What's the right word? I don't want to get overconfident, or cocky, because we're in a strange political environment. Anything's possible, but I feel we have a very strong record of accomplishment, and I think it's not just about looking backwards; it's about looking forward. I think the Comptroller's office, not always fully appreciated, but we've been a key part of the stability in New York State government.
Yeah.
And, I find it ironic, one of the challengers said something to the effect of, oh, he's been around for so long. Well, you look at the other statewide officials in recent years. I haven't had to resign. I haven't been indicted, haven't gone to jail. My longevity is, number one, because, I am an ethical person and I do my job with integrity. And of all the offices where you're looking out for the state finances and you're processing contracts and paying pensions and making sure employees get paid, this is the place where you want a steady hand. And if you're doing the job and you're doing it right, longevity is not a negative.
Right.
I think longevity shows that we are a part of the government that people could count on. And hey, but it's gonna be up to the voters. But I'm looking forward to reminding everybody about what I've done and what my views are and how we're going to continue to help New York navigate through a challenging time. All that's coming out of Washington, the ways in which the Trump administration is targeting a state like New York. It's going to be harder for us with our finances. We're going to continue to play the key role that we've played and keep the Comptroller's office in good, steady hands. And I think that's going to be to the benefit of the taxpayers and the residents of the state.
There is this one proposal that both of your challengers have that I had found very interesting. They want to take money out of the pension fund, the Common Retirement Fund, and create basically an affordable housing fund, $10 billion. What do you think about that?
Well, I find it interesting because what little I read about some of that's being said, I'm not sure that either of these gentlemen know anything about the office or what the pension fund does. We already do programs on affordable housing. This is not a new idea. But the challenge is an obvious one. The purpose of the pension fund is not for a controller to identify their pet projects, as worthy as they may be. It's to secure the retirement benefit, the retirement security of 1.2 million New Yorkers. You need to understand that you have to earn the money to keep the pensions well funded, to try to keep the rates that we charge to our government employers as stable as possible. And we do some very interesting things with the pension fund with investing, including on affordable housing. But we always keep in mind our ultimate goal is to secure the retirement of our 1.2 million members. And so I think to just start saying you're going to have a program for this and a program for that, I think that's getting away from the purpose. Whenever we've done a program, let's say when we do our program investing in New York State businesses, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which has been a very successful program. Our in-state private equity investment program, we still have very rigorous standards in terms of what is the return that we want to make. So it is a program meant to benefit New York. And when we've done our affordable housing investments, same thing. It has to be part of the mix. So just to go out there and throw against the wall, a number, I think that's playing very loose with retirement fund, pension fund. I don't think the pensioners want to hear that. They want to know what you're doing to make sure you're securing their retirement.
The final question I have for you before I let you go is more of a big picture question. Mm-hmm. You've been a Democrat for a really long time now. The party, there's very different views on the party. You have the Zoran Mamdanis, you have the, I guess the Andrew Cuomos, everybody seems to think that something really means something. There's this sense that since Zoran won the June primary, that is the future of your party, that everybody is going to be him now. You've been a member for a while. What do you see as the future of the party?
Wow, that's an interesting question, but certainly one I think we've all been thinking about. I grew up in a good Republican neighborhood and a good Republican family, I might add.
Me too.
My parents weren't too happy, my mother especially, when I said I was going to be a Democrat. But to me, the Democratic Party, the strength of it has always been diversity of opinion. Sometimes that's a weakness also, right? Because Democrats tend not to be as unified. And I think there is an ideological struggle going on now. Maybe some of it's generational. I'm not so sure about that. Probably more ideological. People talk about Zoran, but Bernie Sanders is not exactly the young generation. But he certainly represents part of an ideological point of view. I think the National Party is going to continue to do some soul searching for a period of time. We have to hopefully come up with a more clear message as we enter the congressional races this year, because I think it's very important that we win the Congress back. My view would be one, though, that we have to put a greater priority on unity. I give the Republicans credit. They have their own disagreements, but they seem to come together at election time. And the differences between Democrats, whether you're centrist or left or, sometimes the labels, you don't even know what the labels mean anymore. I think we need to understand that we need to work together to start to take back the country, to take back the House, hopefully the Senate, hopefully the White House, hopefully the Supreme Court at some point. And so I do not want to engage in the kind of ideological warfare that some folks want to get into. And for me, as someone who's seeking to run again in 2026, I'm just going to tell it straight in terms of what my point of view is and my positions are. I'd like to think that what I say is pretty mainstream Democratic positions. Maybe for some they're a little too left. Maybe for some they're a little too center or too right. But, I think that's where, again, for me, while I'm certainly a Democrat, what I love about the Comptroller's office is that the emphasis really is on serving all the people and looking at the broader picture and not getting trapped into the partisan battles of day to day. I did that for 20 years in the legislature. I had very different opinions, had to vote on everything, had to find common ground at times because, the Senate, when I was there, was Republican and the Assembly was Democrat, so you had to have compromise. But what I love about this position is we don't have to get stuck in the daily partisan sniping. So that's why I want to continue in this position. And if I could help keep our party to be unified and credible as an alternative to the Republicans, I hope to contribute that as well.
Yeah, and I often feel like the differences are very overblown in some of these conversations about how different people view things. I feel like it's actually very similar a lot of the time. It's just the way that it's described is so different. And you have a lot of people spinning it politically and putting their own thing on it. And I mean, some
of it's style.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. Some of it's personality.
Yeah.
I'll just say this. I'll give a plug to the Times Union. There was a recent column that I guess one of your guest columnists wrote in about what America would have been like if RFK Sr. had lived. I don't know if you read that. And it really spoke to Robert F. Kennedy Sr.'s ability to cross ideological divides, racial divides, class divides, and that had he lived in 1968, the kind of multiracial, working class as well as upper class coalition he was putting together, it would have made for a very different America. And his concern for the poor, but having just a broad definition of what America could be with a sense of unity and purpose and looking out for everyone. To me, that Robert F. Kennedy Sr. vision of the 1960s is still relevant.
Yeah.
And when I read that column in the TU, I said, you know what? That's why when I was a kid in high school, I responded to that call. And that's why, as someone who's many years removed from high school, I still believe very idealistically that kind of a goal that Robert F. Kennedy Sr.'s put forward, that's still what the Democratic Party needs to be a vehicle for and a vision for. And that's why I still want to stay in the game.
All right. Well, it has been a pleasure to chat. Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Well, I'm in your office. Thanks for inviting me to your office.
Anytime.
If you want to learn more about what's going on in New York government, you can sign up for the Capital Confidential newsletter. Find that at capitalconfidential.com. That's capital with an O. Thanks to the Times Union and the Hearst Corporation for continuing to take a chance on us. Our theme music for now is Easy Hike by DM. Our editor is Jessica Marshall. We'll see you next time. Be well.